Yeah, but we're not doing two. Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the future in Pennsylvania politics and government, we're going to take a look at that with a panel of journalists, and I think we'll do that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we're going to look ahead this week as if anyone could predict or prognosticate what's likely to happen in Pennsylvania politics and government. We still have no defined budget, no permanent budget. Let me put it that way. We have the continuing saga of Kathleen Kane. We have a U.S. Senate election, one of the most important in the country. We have legislative elections, and yes, we're going to have to elect this year in the state an auditor general, an attorney general, and a state treasurer. Joining me to get through all of that is John Micek. He's the editorial page editor of the Harrisburg Patriot News. And don't forget,
PennLive.com.
PennLive.com. There you go. Tony Romeo, you hear his voice on KYW and KDKA radio. And sitting next to me, Angela Couloumbis. You can read her filings. Do I got that right? And you do file stories, right?
My reports, right.
File reports in the Philadelphia Inquirer. All right, Tony. Within a couple of weeks, the governor's going to deliver another budget, but we don't have a complete budget for this fiscal year. Do I have that about right?
Yeah.
So everybody's speculating about, A, whether they'll patch up the budget that the governor line item vetoed, and or a new budget that he's going to announce. So get into the crystal ball.
Well, you probably would need a crystal ball delivered on a truck. You need one of that size to try to predict what's going to happen here. Yeah. I mean, this is unprecedented, at least in recent decades. Right. I believe maybe early 1970s was the last time we were in this situation where we are simply on the precipice of a second budget proposal without the first one being completed. And to my knowledge, no momentum whatsoever to finish the first budget. The governor partially signed, partially vetoed the budget that was sent to him before Christmas. And my sense is that nothing has happened. I guess there may have been some high-level discussions. In fact, the one event that did happen this week was that the House, for lack of two-thirds vote, voted down the appropriations for Pitt, Penn State, Temple,
and Lincoln,
the state-related universities.
Right.
The Democrats withholding their votes, saying, no, we have to finish the rest of the budget. So it's more of the same, and it's hard to imagine that isn't going to continue. And you and I were talking for the purposes of a story last week about the prospect that we could just stumble along for the foreseeable future with these stopgaps, partially vetoed budgets.
John, is there any reason to patch up the budget that now is in place when the governor on February 9, I think, delivers a new budget? Why not just combine them? There's 6 months, I guess, worth of a budget that...
Yeah, I mean, you have the House Republicans who are actually walking around this past week saying that there is no impasse because, presto, we have a budget, problem solved, right?
Yeah,
but, I mean,
right.
As Tony has pointed out, I mean, there are vast components that are still not approved. I mean, we have a general fund budget. That's all the X's and the O's with the numbers and stuff. But the 4 or 5 so-called trailer bills, most notably sort of the fiscal code and the school code bill, that serve as the instructions to actually spend the money.
They give you a headache trying to read them?
Oh, God, yes. I mean, those have not yet been passed, and there are profound disagreements over the language that's in that. So, I mean, it's conceivable that we could just kind of stumble along here for, 6-7 months.
Angela, it's hard to imagine that Governor Wolf, who's wanted a bigger increase in education spending, I think they give him $100 million in the school subsidy. At one point, he was talking about $600-700 million. They ended up, I think, in a framework budget with about $400 million. He's going to give his message. Doesn't he have to come back to the big themes of his election and his campaign? Can he just give a de minimis sort of budget proposal coming up?
I don't think so. I mean, well, I think it's going to depend on what happens between now and February 9th when the next budget address is to occur. But But I think what's going to make it difficult, and there was an AP story that touched on this, is that there are Republicans walking around saying that they're not going to do anything before the April primary because they don't want to vote for very controversial issues between now and then and risk having somebody primary them.
Yeah.
So that has become a bit of a less spoken about factor in this whole mess that is unfolding in the Capitol.
Yeah, that's something we've not actually talked about. In most of these districts, John, your big concern is a primary, not a general election, because
absolutely. I mean, these districts are kind of challenger-proof, except for a challenge from your right flank, which I thought was notable. You had Senator Scott Wagner, the Republican from York County, sitting down the front row of the House Appropriations Committee like Darth Vader, glowering at Republican House members because they know this is the guy with the clout and the cash who could find somebody to primary against them if they wander too far off the orthodoxy.
Yeah,
I just think
Go ahead, John.
In general, the inertia of the Capitol and the trench warfare that we've seen over the last year, that is as big a factor as
everything
anything.
is flat, is what you're saying. It's just flat.
It's trench warfare. They're dug in and they're shooting at each other and they're killing each other, but they're not getting anywhere. It's like World War I all over. And I just don't see anything to come along and change that.
So
at least not in the next 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks before the next budget address.
As we run to break, what we can say is there's not a lot of optimism around this table. You're all smiling. Okay. Yeah. All right, let's take up what else. What would a Sunday morning or weekend show be without a discussion of the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, Kathleen Kane? We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, we have a panel of the state's leading journalists, John Micek, Tony Romeo, and sitting next to me, Angela Couloumbis. I'll turn to her now. Well, if the if the Kathleen Kane story gets more complex, I don't know how it goes. Within a week or so, we're going to get a report from a Senate panel that's supposed to advise the full Senate on whether or not to move forward with a rarely used, once used process to remove the Attorney General, known as address by the Senate, Senate address, direct address.
Right.
I know this is hard. Give us a 30-second lowdown on what that means.
Well, by the end of the month, we will know whether the Senate has been advised to proceed with this removal proceeding to take her out of office.
Okay.
Essentially, the sole reason being is that she is operating now with a suspended law license. Her license was suspended last fall after she had been charged criminally in a perjury conspiracy case out of Montgomery County. What we saw happen this last week was there was a hearing before the Senate committee on this very issue where she was allowed to finally give her position. Right. Her position has been very consistent, which is, my office is operating smoothly and without interruption, even with my suspended license. B, she filed court papers this week to actually have her law license reinstated.
Yeah.
And we saw several people come and testify on her behalf, including former Governor Ed Rendell, who made if he did nothing else, walked out of there perhaps having achieved one thing, and that is to perhaps slow down the process that seemed to be steamrolling forward towards her removal.
Yeah, we should point out that she didn't actually appear herself.
She did not appear. She,
right.
I mean, no, but she hasn't said why she didn't appear. The theory is that her criminal defense lawyers have told her it is not a smart idea to go.
They're worried about
panel.
they'll go to other questions and then she'll be looking.
Anything she says could be held against her.
Yeah, and the former governor made the point that, well, you know, you're narrowly focused on this issue of whether she can function as Attorney General with a suspended law license. So what happens if you vote to remove her and then the Supreme Court reinstates her law license?
Okay.
Right.
And his argument ultimately was that the correct avenue to remove her would be impeachment.
Yeah.
And his argument was to the panel, look, it appears that your real problem with her is her conduct. And the proper route would be
to impeach her. Well, the facts are, and I want to go to John on another point here, the fact she has to defend herself at some point, presumably this year, on 2 felony counts of perjury and 10 misdemeanors. Number 2, she has lawsuits filed against her by ex-employees for a variety of reasons, Angela. Number 3, she has lawsuits pending from people who actually work in the Attorney General's office. So, given, I mean, this has, as someone put it, this has more twist than Chubby Checker. I think columnist John Bear wrote that this week.
Right.
Do I got that about right?
You do. And you know, even if she manages to avoid the removal hearing, at least you know, in the next few weeks, a removal process and a removal vote in the Senate, she has all kinds of issues facing her in 2016. She has a potential criminal trial. She has all of these lawsuits that could end up costing a lot
and time, presumably.
And they already are, because you know, the office of Attorney General is paying to defend a lot
isn't that an
these
issue?
Lawsuits.
That's an issue too, I think, right?
It hasn't been, you know, a very big issue, but perhaps that's just because, you know, there's so many other big
things
problems that she's facing.
Yeah. All right, John. The Attorney General also has to stand for re-election.
Yeah, added bonus, right? They're a bushel basket of Democrats. I think we were trying to run them. We were trying to run them down over the break.
4 have announced now, and 1 probably.
Steve Zappala, the Allegheny County District Attorney, Josh Shapiro, the Montgomery County Commissioner, has stepped up just within the last week as well, in amongst the cast of characters, and that's presuming that she can even stand for re-election, given her sort of dubious legal status. The Attorney General says that she can and she plans to, but certainly her star has diminished a great deal, and you know, amongst all of her other problems, she now has her long-term political viability to think about.
Yeah, it's hard for me. I mean, as I think we tape this program, the Democratic State Committee meets this week, I think, to sort of get into all of that. Tony, how tough is it going to be to try to run for re-election under all these circumstances? I mean, you've covered a lot of campaigns. You got some heavyweights running against her. I think you would agree there. These aren't exactly unknown people. This looks like an extremely difficult task. No?
Well, you talking about the Attorney General's race?
Seeking,
I'm speechless. I mean, it's hard to look at this and
finding reporters
and find anything analogous to any situation you've ever seen before. You know, it's just very unclear. And what's more interesting to me is the dynamic in the Senate. If in fact there is a vote to remove her, I think if you saw the committee this week, from the questioning, it certainly seemed to me, anyway, that the Republicans' line of questioning indicated that they were going in one direction, and the Democrats seemed to be lining up to vote against removal, while the Republicans are going to need some Democratic votes in the Senate, because it's 2/3.
That's a great
just
point.
A couple. But the point being that the question for the Democrats is it better or worse to have her part of the election dynamic?
Yeah, I want to turn to the U.S. Senate election. This is a third of the big topics. We're going to run to a break, but there's one point I want to ask the reporters about on the Kane thing, and we'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Back with our panel of journalists, we're talking about what else? The dilemma of Kathleen Kane. Go ahead, you wanted to make a point about.
Well, I get emails quite a bit from people who really believe that she has been and is a victim of this grand conspiracy of angry Republican men who have been upset at her being kind of a dynamic, different type of attorney general, an attorney general who takes chances and who rattles cages. And that has certainly been her message. It has been her message now for over a year, both in her criminal case and in all the other, side issues that she faces.
But what about her sister? I mean, her sister received 58 of these emails. She wasn't disciplined. There were, a couple of dozen folks who were disciplined within the Attorney General's office for participating. We don't know who they are. You've all asked for these emails for the better part of a year. She could have given them to you. The Supreme Court said last January they were personal. You asked for them. You didn't get them, and they were selectively released.
Right. Well, her critics say that is really the only weapon in her arsenal, and she has used it, at selective points in time when she's needed to. She has obviously refuted that. She said, I want to make all of it public, and I intend to make all of it public, and that's why I now have a special prosecutor who's looking into this. But the fact of the matter is that her message was hurt greatly when it was revealed that her sister...
You disagree.
But I think the point Angela was going to make was that there's reasons why Democrats would be concerned about having her on the ballot and reasons why they would be concerned about her being bounced off of the ballot. It
cuts both ways.
Is that right? Do you agree with that?
No, it absolutely does. I mean, there's still a lot of Democrats who are intensely loyal to her. Her not being there could be an issue for them.
All right, let's stay on this subject. We have to elect in this state a state treasurer. The Democratic previously elected state treasurer, Rob McCord, pleaded guilty to extortion. There's an acting Treasury Secretary or head of the Treasury Department in office now. So the Democrats look like they're going to have to defend two offices that are all caught up in the scandal, so to speak. And this is going to be, John, you've covered tons of these elections, as all of you have. This is going to be wild.
Well, if nothing else, it will serve to remind voters that the Treasury Department actually exists and is an elected post. I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, the Rob McCord extortion case almost seems quaint by comparison.
Yeah, good point.
Remember the good old days of Rob McCord when he got sent up for extortion? It seems like a million years ago now.
Well, I guess there's certain advantages to saying, okay, I'm guilty, I'm going away.
Well,
the Dems do have all three statewide row officers right now. There's no reason to think that Eugene DePasquale
he seems strong. I mean, we're being nonpartisan here, but he does.
And typically, the incumbents in those gigs have them for such time as for the two terms that they want them. I mean, Treasury is kind of an open question. It's kind of like the appendix of state government. No one really thinks about it, but it can be a launching off point to other positions.
All right, we're running to a break. I want to get into the U.S. Senate election a bit. We have one of the most important U.S. Senate elections in the country, and we'll take that up in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society, inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine, and by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
All right, final segment with our panel of journalists. We have one of the most important U.S. Senate elections. Senator Pat Toomey is seeking a second term, but John Micek, there are 3 Democratic opponents. 2 of them sort of traditional. One of them, I think it would be fair. You're all smiling. No, is it safe? Finish my thought.
Here's the punk rock candidate. That's John Fetterman, the mayor of Braddock out there in Allegheny County, one of these former sort of steel mill towns. Showed up at PA Society when everybody else was in tuxedos. He was in a tuxedo T-shirt and black Dickie pants. It was
6'8",
6'8",
tattoos.
300-something pounds. Very goatee. I mean, in this age of kind of self-styled outsider candidates, this guy is sort of the actual, authentic, real deal outsider.
So we have Fetterman, we have Katie McGinty, who ran for governor in the Democratic primary and lost. We have Joe Sestak, former member of Congress, retired Navy admiral. You were going to make a point about Fetterman and how different he is.
He stands out.
And what the Democratic state chairman said?
Well, there was a story a couple weeks ago, I believe it was an interview with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, in which the chairman of the Democratic Party essentially said that Fetterman is probably best positioned to beat Pat Toomey. And I was really surprised by that because, the party, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, has not endorsed in this race yet. And I'm not sure that the party will endorse.
Yeah. Go ahead. But I think there's another point, Tony. The party leaders all seem tilting towards, and she has received, the she being Katie McGinty, one union endorsement after another. So doesn't it appear that she's, quote, the party favorite? Or am I on Mars about that?
Well, I think with the Democratic Party, it's always hard to tell. I mean, they're less likely to endorse than the Republican Party. Correct me if I'm wrong. And their endorsements usually don't carry
matter
as much weight.
Right.
So I don't know. It's hard to.
And you need a 2/3 vote with the Rendell rule, which very hard to get.
Certainly, she is. If Fetterman's the quintessential outsider, she's the
quintessential insider.
The party establishment.
That's a good point.
A stalwart.
Sure.
And Terry, I mean, there are some important mathematics here to mention as well, sort of overarching all of this. I mean, Senator Toomey, Republican, elected in 2010, one of the top 5 most highly watched Senate races in the entire country.
Absolutely.
A strong finish by Hillary Clinton could spell real trouble for him. The Democrats need a net pickup of 5 with the Republican president to take back the Senate. They need 4 with the Veep casting a tie-breaking vote. So, I mean, that's real trouble for Toomey. And the thing about McGinty that we need to keep in mind is she finished a distant 4th in the 2014 primary. I mean, she's collecting all of these endorsements. She seems to have the imprimatur of Governor Wolf, but she has issues of her own with her ties to the energy industry. Admiral Sestak finished 2 points behind Toomey in 2010. He had issues of his own.
You get the last word. All right. Thanks for coming on the program. Great update, or look into the future, I should say. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.